As far as we know, there's nothing besides the fact that we know that Kraken was used by one of the hackers.
Kim, you were saying something as well?
Yeah, I was just saying that Jesse has a great reputation and Kraken has a great reputation. So I would like to hear from him what he thinks the aftermath of this drama is going to be.
All right, thanks, Kim. Yeah, to answer the first question, so can't say too much about the client accounts, but between FTX, Alameda, and the execs at those companies, they had a bunch of accounts at Kraken that seemed to be just legitimate accounts, and that account that you were referring to, we believe was accessed by the actual account owner. And there was nothing like suspicious about the login or anything like that. So we ended up just freezing all of those accounts after speaking with law enforcement. So that's the current status. Is basically every account we're aware of that's associated with those guys now is totally frozen and can't make any more withdrawals, even if they seem to be legit.
And regarding Kim's question about what you expect next, so we had some notable people voice concerns about specific exchanges and in a very subtle way without using names. So I know you probably can't use names either, but what can you tell users and listeners? And later I'd ask you for a similar message for regulators, but we'll stick to users first.
Yeah, I think the exchange longevity now is something that people really should be looking at. Have the exchanges survived a few bear cycles? When the tide goes out, you see who's been swimming naked or who's been taking, a lot of risk with leverage. So I think that's something to look at. If you see a new exchange pop up in the middle of a bull market and, they seem to be spending a lot of money on advertising and everything, that obviously might be your money, we found out. So I think longevity is worth a lot in the space. If you've survived a few cycles, I think you're more likely to be solvent. I think people should be looking for proof of reserves, which Kraken has done too, just this year. We're planning to do more, next year with broader asset coverage. I think also be aware that the media has just completely botched this whole thing. They were just writing like endless fluff pieces about FTX. They did zero diligence. Even the regulators who had FTX right under their nose the entire time, basically like failed to spot any of this. VCs who should have been doing diligence failed to spot it. So you guys were talking earlier about just like when money's flying around, people just like stop paying attention to obvious signs. And I think everyone needs to remember that you really have to do your own diligence. And even though Kraken's been around for 11 years, I still encourage people to not keep more money on the exchange than they really have to do their trading and to self-custody as much as possible. Because just as one example, we just froze all of the FTX accounts, right? So that could happen to your account too. And as we saw in Canada, when we got an order from the Canadian government to freeze the accounts of people at the trucker protests, those accounts were frozen without any due process. So even without malfeasance, even without an exchange hack or even without the exchange misappropriating funds, the government could come and steal your funds at any time when they're on a centralized exchange. So people really, if they trust themselves with the self-custody, if they at all can get their funds off of the exchanges, I strongly encourage them to do that and just put the funds back when they're actually ready to trade. And you can't really trust influencers on this. A lot of people got caught up in the contagion of this not because they actually like screwed up and got hacked, or not because they directly misappropriated funds, but they just trusted the wrong custodian. I saw this news that like FTX had required all these companies they invested in to actually keep the money they were investing back in their FTX accounts. That should raise like huge red flags. They seem to be like running around like basically buying account balances out of bankruptcies. Also super suspicious. If someone's like overbidding to buy user account balances, why might that be? So there were like a ton of red flags here. I think there are a few more red flags that came up in the last 24 hours about another exchange, which, a big part of this is basically FTX is like complete lack of controls, obviously, right? Like there's very small company, and VCs would talk to us and say, how is FTX getting so much done? They're like 50 people and, they're doing all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's a very good question because Kraken's security team is 100 people. So how is FTX with 50 people doing everything that, they seem to be doing? And the answer is like, basically they have this like, glass cannon build where they're basically doing nothing on the back end. There's like just nothing under the surface and everything is a shit show and your balances are managed on spreadsheets and Sam at any time can just go and like cut and paste your balance into his balance anytime he wants. And, so that's like pretty scary, and if you see these like small operations these days, I think it's very hard to start an exchange the way that they have done it with just a very small group of people if you have not built all of this infrastructure first. And I think people just need to be very aware of that, of like kind of what it takes to really operate a secure custodian. And some other mishaps in the industry in the last 24 hours, massive transfer moved of like $400 million to the wrong address out of a cold storage wallet, supposedly. That kind of thing to me says there's just a complete lack of controls there. And, again, it seems like one guy with access to a wallet who can just do whatever he wants without any kind of like second signer or like approval or anything like that, second set of eyeballs on it at a minimum. So that's pretty scary, right? That's like indicative of like maybe bigger problems there, bigger lack of controls or auditability or process, where anything could blow up at any time, basically. So I encourage people to like look at these red flags and decide whether they want to stick around at a venue like that and roll the dice, or maybe move their coins to somebody that has proven to be reliable over a longer period of time, or just get the hell out. Just get your coins off and put them in your own wallet. I mean, at this point, we don't know where the contagion is going to spread to next. So, I think the safest bet is to get your coins out, especially for any platform that has been doing like a significant amount of lending. Anyone that might be like heavily over leveraged, that might be running a hedge fund that might have been borrowing or lending tons of coins. Any of those guys, I think, are like at the top of the list for blowing up next, or anyone who had significant exposure to FTX in one way or another, because we know that they have been required to maybe hold their balances at FTX. So there's just a lot of risk out there right now.
One point you mentioned, I've got a question about how most of us didn't connect the dots. We had concerns, CZ, I don't know if you mentioned it on the space or someone else mentioned it, someone else mentioned CZ had concerns with Sam, but I don't know when that was. I know that Elon got those bad vibes, and I can't remember who else mentioned that they got bad vibes from Sam, the regulator in Saudi Arabia, that FTX was trying to get a license there, had bad vibes from him. But we seem to have missed that as a community. Why do you think that is, Jesse?
It's a very good question. I think that there was money to be made on FTX, maybe because they were market making unprofitably and giving money away. They made it very easy to get onboarded, for which they probably accumulated like a lot of OFAC violations and other kind of like regulatory, potential fines coming at them for that. So, they created a competitive advantage for themselves with the way that they were running the business. So they definitely weren't running it by the same parameters that a regulated business would be confined to. So the things that you could do on FTX, how fast it was to get onboarded, the kind of products that you could trade, how easy it was to circumvent any kind of like geo restrictions on what you could do. They made all that super easy. And so I think that, unfortunately, the market finds a way, and people will find, someone's going to offer a product that's missing in the market, and people will go to it. And I think they won't be that scrutinizing if there aren't many other options out there. And this situation is sort of created by the regulators. They did not allow Kraken and Coinbase and Gemini and domestic exchanges in the U.S. to do this stuff. We've been heavily scrutinized, so it's sort of easier for a new upstart company to emerge and do a bunch of shady stuff than it is these older companies, because these older companies are just constantly under surveillance by the regulators. And often,
So
like, they'll see me tweet and they'll call us up and ask me like what I'm tweeting about. So a new exchange can kind of get away with a lot, and I think that was really valuable to people in a time of extreme hype.
I think what happened here is that because of the political donations that were made, there was a totally different layer of protection. Also, the media contacts of the Democratic Party have pushed this guy to the
Yeah.
heavens and praised him as this amazing entrepreneur. I've seen some pieces that people tweeted today that were written about him, that he's going to be the first trillionaire and he's going to save the world, and all these videos about how much money he's given away and how he's presented as this basically next coming of Jesus Christ. And that's,
Yeah.
the political donations have opened so many doors for Sam to do all this shit. And that just shows you how corrupt the system is. If you
Yeah.
pay enough money to politicians, you get away with murder.
Yeah, and I think Sam did a really good job of maintaining an image where you could never figure out if he was good or evil. And obviously, we go and we look at all of these videos of him talking about wanting to save the world. I don't want money because I care about money.
Equation is the proof of assets. But there's a big problem with proof of reserves in that we don't know what their liabilities are. So there's one of the challenges with blockchain is that there's a danger of creating a false sense of security, and then there's back end agreements happening, or legal contracts on top of that. And like, who knows what those crypto.com transactions to gate are and what that means. So how do you, like, couple of questions, I mean, they're kind of boring, but they're actually the crux of this issue, that once you've got proof of reserves, how do you do proof of liabilities? Which obviously sounds like a centralized accounting job, and now we're seeing some more corruption in the accounting practices. And then also the whole concept of, like, the Celsius scenario of, we have a $2 billion balance sheet because they take the value of their token and market to market when the liquidity doesn't exist. You got any thoughts about those kind of liabilities and fake balance sheet? Is really the answer just become a public company type thing? Or
Yeah, I mean, you can still scam people after you become a public company, but as you said, you can't really prove a negative with your liabilities. You kind of have to rely on an auditor or some other. I mean, even the auditors of Enron obviously like screwed this up, right? So it's really hard to, I think, completely understand what the liabilities are, and it's sort of a thing where I think you just have to look at a business over a period of time to try to understand, are they able to kind of keep the thing going? And that's really, I think, the best thing you can look at. You can't, with the proof of reserves, it proves that you have what you owe to your clients, at least at that point in time, for the snapshot. And the more often you can do that, I think the harder it is to pull off. And if you have a ton of extra liabilities out there that you haven't stated, I think those just become maybe harder to manage over time as well. And if you continue to publish proof of reserves, the people that you hold those liabilities with, I think, might be more likely to come out and say something as well if they see that maybe you don't have the reserves that you said you did when you were taking the loan from them, or whatever it is. So I think it kind of helps with those liabilities as well, just get some transparency around what you actually have. And you're totally right about these tokens like FTT, where you just make up a number and you put a dollar value on it and you try to defend that in a very illiquid market, and you use that as collateral to, make yourself loans out of the client balances and stuff like that, and just say that it all kind of like evens out in terms of dollars. Obviously that's super shady, and the whole arrangement with Alameda and FTT and, having their own token that they were moving around and trading was already like a very suspicious setup. And I think we should look at other companies that are both holding client balances and have their own coin, and ask whether they might be using that coin as collateral to borrow from their client balances.
Jesse, you mentioned, I want to bring up quickly the point of the transaction that we saw earlier that kind of triggered this, plus Kim's message to start the space again. The Crypto.com transfer to Gate. That we've had an insider at Crypto.com come on earlier, one of the first 100 employees. We've also had another entity that uses the same process or the same software or whatever it was as Crypto.com. They're going to come back and speak. For me, every single indicator and every person that comes up and speaks, it's a red flag. It's a very concerning red flag on what. And another person also mentioned they had various licenses and they needed to abide by various requirements that wouldn't allow for something like this to happen. The question is more broad though. How many more exchanges could we expect to fall? And I'm not talking about Crypto.com in this case. I'm talking about in general. And if we missed the mess with FTX, the one that most of us trusted and was up there with, Binance, FTX, Kraken as the 3 exchanges to trust, that was the narrative a few days ago. If we missed FTX, how many more are going to be falling over the next few days and weeks? Because I have a feeling like Chet is going to jump in as I speak and say, breaking news, XYZ exchange is now frozen withdrawals.
Actually, what I was about to break in with was, I'm not sure if this was covered while I was asleep, so I'm going to cover it anyways. The Bahamian securities regulator did not order the FTX to open local withdrawals to Bahamian citizens as was reported prior.